This week on The Watchman, he's Israel's longest-serving prime minister, and fresh off his recent election victory, he's primed and ready to lead the Jewish state once again. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Bibi Netanyahu joins us for an exclusive interview to discuss his blockbuster new book, Bibi, My Story, and the dramatic life events that have shaped him into one of the world's great leaders.
It's the legacy of my father and the legacy of my fallen brother. It's a life of purpose to protect and secure the life of the one and only Jewish state.
From Iran to the Abraham Accords, from Obama to Trump, from Jerusalem to Israel's destiny, Benjamin Netanyahu shares the inside story of his time as Israel's prime minister and his incredible life journey. Only right here on The Watchman. And welcome to The Watchman. We are joined today by a man who really needs no introduction, the Prime Minister of Israel and author of the blockbuster new book, Bibi, My Story. Benjamin Netanyahu joins us. Mr. Prime Minister, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Erick.
We've got so much to cover. We're going to talk, of course, about the great new book, Bibi, My Story, which you wrote in longhand, by the way. But up first, Mr. Prime Minister, quick question. What are the goals of this new Israeli government that you will be leading? Of course, you're Israel's longest-serving prime minister. This is your third go-round at the helm. When I think of the focus for your new government, of course, I'm thinking first and foremost of Iran's nuclear program and stopping it. What are your goals with this new government?
3 goals. Stop Iran, expand the circle of peace beyond the 4 incredible peace agreements in the Abraham Accords. And third, continue to build Israel as a innovation juggernaut for the world and for us and our neighbors.
Let's dig into Bibi, My Story, your brand new best-selling book. Talk about your father's influence in your life and also the influence he had in the reestablishment of the Jewish state.
Well, my father was a great historian, a great student of Jewish history and general history. And he concluded after World War I that unless the Jewish people had a state, then European Jewry would be not decimated, but would be destroyed. When Hitler came to power, my father, in 1933, my father was all of 23 years old. And he wrote that racial anti-Semitism that Hitler brought would destroy all of European Jewry, and if Hitler won, all of the Jews of the world. And he said that the only thing that we had to do was to convince the free world that this hatred would only begin with the Jews, but it would, in fact, spread to all of mankind. And unless the free world fought Hitlerism, they too would suffer a horrible fate. If more people had listened to what this 23-year-old genius really said, and maybe the course of history and the 60 million who died in World War II might have changed. And of course, a third of our people, the 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, would have been saved. But that didn't happen. My father, on the eve of World War II, came to the United States to agitate for a Jewish state. And he was telling the leaders of America, including General Eisenhower, right at the end of the war, he said, you should support a Jewish state, not only because it's just, because it's right, because of the horrors that were inflicted on us and the Holocaust and so on, but because it's in your interest. My father instilled in me, to answer your question, the idea that to save the Jewish people, we needed a Jewish state. To have a Jewish state, we need a strong Jewish army. To have a Jewish army, I added my own addition, and I describe this in my book, we need a strong economy. To have a strong economy, we have to have a free market economy. And that's what I ended up leading Israel to, making it a strong free market high technology economy with a strong army, strong cyber capability, strong intelligence.
And in talking about your father and how he saw the gathering storm of Nazi Germany, it's hard not to see the echoes today with the Iranian regime and Iran's nuclear program, which you have been warning about for years. You did so in 2015, of course, before a joint session of Congress in Washington, D.C. You detail in the book how you spent a good chunk of time in the United States, attended high school here, attended MIT, worked here as well. Your dad was teaching here. How did your time in the States give you an understanding of how to reach the American people, which I think was on full display during that joint session of Congress?
First of all, it led me to have a deep appreciation for the United States. And I think Israel and the United States, as I say in the book, are two countries founded with a purpose. The purpose of Israel is to reconstitute Jewish life in the original Promised Land. The purpose of America is the new Promised Land, is to really be the guardian of liberty in the world. And when I grew up, I spent a few years in high school in the United States next to your place, your home ground in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania. And I learned to appreciate the remarkable capabilities of America. I would never sell America short. It's freedom, the enterprise, the ingenuity, free markets. I valued that a lot, and then brought it, in many ways, brought some of that and quite a bit of that to Israel. So that, I think, is one thing. The second thing I learned, again from my father, is that the way you influence governments, in democratic governments in the modern world, is through the force of public opinion. You can't do that in countries that are basically dictatorships because you don't have access to public opinion. But ultimately, in Israeli democracy, American democracy, any democracy, you must speak not only to the leaders, to whom you speak about their national interests, but speak to the public at large about what is just and what is not just. Make your case before the American public. And I've tried to do that over the years.
Coming up, Prime Minister Netanyahu shares the horrific family tragedy that changed his life forever. That's next. One of the things you detail in the book is the influence of your brother, Jonathan Yoni Netanyahu, who was a great hero in Israel, renowned for his military actions. His death, obviously, you say in the book that you didn't know how you would recover from it, and yet you did. How did that help shape your worldview going forward? I'm thinking in particular about how you really became, to use an American term, a Paul Revere of sorts in warning about the rise of terrorism around the world. How deeply did Yoni's death impact you when it came to that?
Enormously. I mean, we were very close as brothers. He was my older brother, 3 years old. We were three brothers. I have a younger brother, too. Yoni was wounded in the Six-Day War. He was a 21-year-old, by that time, reserve paratrooper officer. And his elbow was smashed. He nearly died 3 hours before the end of the Six-Day War. He would never fight again. I was delighted when I saw him in the hospital because I had a premonition that something horrible would happen to him, that he would die in battle. And here he was. That's it. He would never go back into the military. I was very glad, actually. And he went to Harvard, made the dean's list, came back a year later, and said, I have to be in Israel because the war of terror was rearing its head. And he said, even though I can't be in the army, I'll be at least next to my friends who are serving reserve duty. I can't have the pleasure of being in Cambridge, in Boston. And then I entered the army, and I entered a special unit an elite force that was really participated in many things. I nearly drowned in a firefight in the Suez Canal. I stormed a hijacked aircraft in which I was shot by one of our soldiers when we liberated the hostages on it. I was bitten by a scorpion. I nearly ran with my Jeep into a Phantom fighter jet, the way you see in the movies, exactly like that. Was not jailed for it because I was leading a special mission at the time, so they let me go. So I nearly died, but the real crux of it came when the commander of my unit said, I want you to go to officer school. And I said, no, I'm not going. And he said, well, I'll throw you out of the unit if you don't go. And I said, what am I going to do? That's a fate worse than death. So I went to see my older disabled veteran brother, who was then a student in Jerusalem. And I said, well, what do I say to the commander? And he said, oh, that's easy. Tell him I'll go in your place. And I said, you're old. He was old of 23, mind you. You're disabled. And he said, just let him look at my file. They had my brother and me in the same unit. Soon my younger brother joined me. We're 3 brothers in a tiny unit. It's 100 fighters. That's it. And so we broke all the rules. I was wounded in that plane rescue. I became an officer and left the Army after 5 years, went to study at MIT, as you said. Yeah. My older brother, Yoni, stayed on. And 4 years later, he became, as commander of this unit, special unit, he led the storming party in the most spectacular rescue mission of modern times, the raid at Entebbe, in which they came in the middle of the night, killed the 4 terrorists, the Ugandan troops that were guarding them, destroyed the MiG aircraft that could give chase to the planes returning our hostages. And that was when I learned about Yoni's death. Actually, I was in Boston at the time at MIT. And when I learned about it from my brother, the only thing I could think of was I have to get to my parents. My father was teaching at Cornell University at the time. So I drove for 7 hours from Boston to Ithaca, a Via Dolorosa of unimaginable agony, walked on the path leading to my parents' home. And there was a big glazed window. And I could see my father strolling back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. He was deep in thought and turned his head, saw me, and he said, "Bibi, what are you doing here?" And then he saw my face, and he understood at once, let out a terrible cry, and then I heard my mother scream. So this was actually worse than hearing about Yoni's death. Now the answer to your question, I didn't think I could recover from that. Yoni was so exceptional. People like that are in the movies, but you don't think that you'd actually meet someone like that. But he was that and more. And he didn't have to die to become a legend. He was a legend in his life for those who knew him. And I thought that I could never recover, but somehow I found the strength from my parents' incredible dignity and from our own family bond with my younger brother. I summoned the strength to overcome inconsolable grief and to harness our efforts to the battle against international terrorism. That led me eventually into political life and to becoming Israel's longest-serving prime minister, a task which I'm going to continue now. So what is it? It's the legacy of my father and the legacy of my fallen brother. It's a life of purpose to protect and secure the life of the one and only Jewish state.
Up next, the Prime Minister has a warning for America about Iran's nuclear program. Plus, is peace possible between Israel and Saudi Arabia? More from our exclusive interview with Benjamin Netanyahu after the break. When you look at Churchill, we mentioned earlier the gathering storm that your father saw, even your grandfather, Nathan, who was a great Zionist who you talk about in the book as well. Do you see echoes today? And we're talking Iran right now, of course, and Iran's proxies in the region. Do you see echoes between that gathering storm in the 1930s that Churchill saw? Many in the West did not want to acknowledge. It seems today we're in a similar situation, Mr. Prime Minister, where many Western leaders do not want to acknowledge that Iranian threat, how it threatens not only Israel and the region, but the world, including where I'm sitting right now, the United States.
First of all, it's important to recognize that Iran chants death to Israel, death to America. And we are the little Satan, you're the large Satan. And by the way, in one fundamental thing, they're right. We are a reflection of Western civilization in the heart of the Middle East. And they think that if they destroyed us, they'll overtake the Middle East, where they're developing intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach, with nuclear warheads, any city in the United States. So it's not merely an Israeli interest, it's an American interest and the interest of everyone in between, in Europe and so on. Now, did they see it? Not recently, not until recently. But I have a feeling that there's a change in the way they perceive it. They're not rushing forward, I'm glad to see, in Washington, to rekindle this horribly flawed Iran deal, which would pave Iran's path with gold, with hundreds of billions of dollars of sanction relief on the way to a nuclear arsenal. Doesn't stop them, just pays them to delay by a few years. There is only one way to stop a rogue nation from developing nuclear weapons, It's by a combination of crippling sanctions, and the most critical thing is a credible military option. And unless we have that threat with Iran, then yes, you will have that change. But here's what I sense the difference is. I've been speaking against the wind for too long, but I think the wind has changed right now because of the brave men and extraordinarily brave women of Iran who are dying in the streets, protesting their enslavement and subjugation, fighting for freedom. There is a coalition that is building across a wide spectrum of nations and political opinion that really sees Iran for what it is, a horrible regime, that if such a regime would have nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them worldwide, then yes, it would threaten the peace of the entire world and not just Israel.
As you are entering another term at the helm, what are your goals with the Abraham Accords? Do you see real potential to expand the Accords?
Absolutely, for the reasons you described. One is the concern with Iranian aggression, obviously, and the fact that Israel is no longer seen as an enemy by most of the Arab countries, but as their indispensable ally in pushing back on Iranian aggression. And certainly my commitment to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons, I think, serves everybody well. The second reason is also that Israeli technology, this juggernaut of innovation, helps the Arab populations as well in desalinization, in energy, in medicine, you name it, agriculture, in all these areas. The Arab populations stand to benefit as well. So for both reasons, I see a fertile field for expanding the peace beyond the historic four peace treaties that we have with the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, and Sudan. And yes, I think Saudi Arabia would be, look, the Abraham Accords were a quantum leap. If we have, for peace, if we have peace with Saudi Arabia, it will be a quantum leap over a quantum leap.
Coming up, Prime Minister Netanyahu shares what strong Christian support means to him and to Israel. Don't move. As we mentioned earlier, you never thought you'd be in this position, that you'd enter politics, become Israel's longest-serving prime minister. Talk about how you do see the hand of destiny in everything that's happened in your life, perhaps the hand of God even, and also your deep and long-lasting relationship with the Christian community in the United States and around the world, and what that's meant to you.
When you write a book like this, and I wrote it, as you said, in longhand, over 9 months. By the way, I'm very grateful to the previous government for knocking me out of office for the year that I needed to write. You can't write such a book when you're in office. But you sort of see the strands that weave together, and you almost ask yourself, but, this led to that, and this led to that. And eventually, all these strands lead to where I am today, and you begin to question, can you explain fate? I can't explain it. You could argue that it is driven by providence, but I can't say that, but I can say that as I look back to my life, it's clearly been driven by purpose. I've lived a life of purpose. And by the way, I say to all your audience, you'll enrich your life if you live a life of purpose, and you'll enrich it even more if that purpose is bigger than yourself. And if you want to glean insights into living a life of purpose, I think you might find them in my own story. But beyond that, you ask about the support of Christians. It's been a tremendous force. And people don't know the role of Christianity, and especially of Christian Zionists, in propelling the modern Jewish movement for the reestablishment of statehood. This was in many ways preceded, the Jewish national movement was preceded by the Christian Zionists, who throughout the 19th century in particular, in Britain and the United States, supported the return of the Jews to the land of Israel, which was pretty barren and left over, and nobody actually did anything with it. And they said the land will come back to life only when the Jews come back here. One of the people who said that was actually Mark Twain, who visited the land. But so did many others, American clergy and others, who said, the land will come back to life only when the the vision of the prophets of the ingathering of the Jewish exiles would materialize. And they were right. So they actually preceded the Jewish national movement and gave it a tremendous boost. And today I can say that we have no better friends in the world than the Christian supporters of Israel in the United States, in South America, in Brazil, in Scandinavia, in Nigeria, in Africa, in Korea, South Korea. What people don't realize is how deep those roots of Christian-Jewish partnership in reforming and protecting the Jewish state go. They go back centuries, and I am deeply, deeply grateful for them.
We're talking about the hand of fate in your life, and I think of what Mordecai said to Esther in the book of Esther, which I know you know very well. Perhaps you are in this position for such a time as this, these tumultuous times, but historic times that we're living in right now. And Mr. Prime Minister, you are making history, and we pray for much more to come. The book is called Bibi, My Story, a must-read. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, thanks so much for joining us. God bless you, sir. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, and thank you all.
What a fascinating discussion with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, that was only part of our wide-ranging interview. If you want to see the entire conversation, including the Prime Minister's thoughts on Jerusalem and why he never thought he would enter politics, visit our YouTube channel at WatchmanTV.com and you will find it all there. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted on our YouTube channel. Remember, the book is called Bibi, My Story, and you can find it at Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Thanks so much for joining us this week for a very special edition of The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman newscast episodes every weekday.